So, uh, good evening, everybody. So, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm gonna show a YouTube video. I'm going to do a share screen. I'm going to have to take out my headphones so that you'll be able to hear the video, although the video is in Hebrew, so it has subtitles. So I presumably most of you are going to be making use of the subtitles rather than, the actual sound of it. But before I share the video, I want to tell you what it is and why I'm sharing it. It is a speech that was given in the Knesset a week ago tonight by a member of Knesset, Rabbi Gilad Kariv. Gilad Kariv is the first non-Orthodox rabbi ever elected to the Knesset. He is a Reform rabbi, an Israeli Reform rabbi. He was the executive director of the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism. Progressive Judaism is the term that the Reform movement uses in Israel. He was executive director of the Israeli Reform Movement prior to being elected to the Knesset. He was elected as a member of the Labor Party, which subsequently the Labor Party and a smaller left-wing Zionist party called Meretz merged recently, and they are now known, and people say Hebrew is easy, but it's not. I mean, this party is known as Ha-Demokratim. Okay, so he represents Ha-Demokratim, and this speech was given during a debate on the budget for next year. I'm not sure precisely what the content has to do per se with the budget, but you should know that Israeli right-wingers and these people are far to the right of Netanyahu and his party, but they are in the government, and they are seriously agitating for the renewal of Jewish settlement in the Gaza Strip. Okay, and so that is kind of the context of Rabbi Kariv's remarks. So let me take out my headphones, share the screen, show you the video, and then I'll explain why I thought it was important to show the video. The video is less than 5 minutes.
ומדברים איתנו על המכבים. לכו תלמדו פרק בתולדות המכבים, פרק בתולדות עם ישראל. תלמדו כיצד המכבים היו הראשונים לצאת אל הקרב, אבל היו גם הראשונים להגיע לבריתות מדיניות. לכו תלמדו איך בתקופת המכבים חודש החידוש הגדול של פיקוח נפש דוחה שבת, כפי שמתואר בספרי המכבים. על הרפורמה שעשה מתתיהו הכהן, זה שקרא מי לאדוני אליי, הוא זה שבא ואמר פיקוח נפש דוחה שבת. אז אם פיקוח נפש דוחה שבת, אז פיקוח נפש דוחה גם את הפנטזיות המשיחיות שלכם של חידוש ההתיישבות היהודית בלב אוכלוסייה פלסטינית של 2.3 מיליון איש. איך אירעה התקלה הנוראית הזו, שלבכם גס גם בחיי האחים והאחיות שלנו, ולבכם גם גס בחייהם של ילדים, של נשים, של קשישים, רק מכיוון שהם משתייכים לעם האחר. איפה במסורת ישראל למדתם את גסות הרוח הזו, שמביאה חברי וחברות כנסת לעמוד כאן על הבמה ולומר שבקרב 2.3 מיליון פלסטינים אין אף אדם חף מפשע? מתי אירעה המוטציה הדתית, הרוחנית והלאומית והמוסרית הזו בקרב הקהלים שלכם? מתי נדפק ה-DNA היהודי והדמוקרטי שלכם, שעומדת כאן מחוקקת ואומרת שבקרב 2.3 מיליון איש אין אחד חף מפשע? תינוק בן יומו הוא לא חף מפשע. אתה יודע מי דיבר ככה? הגרועים שבשונאי ישראל. אלה היו הטקסטים שהם הוציאו מהפה שלהם. ואתם נושאים את שמה של תורת ישראל בפיכם. בגאון? בביזיון. בגאון. האדם שעומד ואומר שאין בקרב 2.3 מיליון איש אחד שהוא חף מפשע, לא נושא את תורת ישראל בגאון, אדוני היושב ראש, הוא נושא אותה בביזיון, בביזיון מוסרי, עבודה זרה, צלם בהיכל. לכו תחגגו נר שני על גבול עזה עם הקרוונים הבזויים שלכם, בשעה שאחינו ואחיותינו נמקים. מה בינכם לבין חלוצי העלייה השנייה וחלוצי העלייה השלישית, שמי שפותח את משנתם רואה לפחות את הניסיון, את היומרה, את הכוונה שמעשה בניינה של הארץ יעלה בקנה אחד עם ערכים הומניסטיים? מה לכם ולתורתו של אדה גורדון? מה לכם ולדבריו של ברל כצנלסון? גם את זה אתם מנסים לנחס לעצמכם, תוך שאתם מעוותים את תורתם ואת דרכם של ראשוני הציונות, כפי שאתם מעוותים את דרכה של תורת ישראל, גם ביחס למצוות פדיון השבויים, וגם ביחס לערכים אנושיים. היהדות בישרה את הרעיון הגדול של בריאת כל אדם בצלם אלוהים, של קדושת חייו של כל אדם. ואתם, לאיזה תאומות מוסריים אתם מביאים את החברה הישראלית? תודה. ולכן אנחנו נאמר כאן, כפי שאמרתי בתחילת דבריי, אנחנו מקדשים מלחמה על מכונת הרעל, ואנחנו מקדשים מלחמה על משיחיות השקר הלאומנית, הגזענית והפונדמנטליסטית. תודה רבה. מרעילה וממיתה את הנפש הישראלית.
So pretty powerful. And the reason that I showed it, I mean, I don't want to claim that Rabbi Kareev represents a majority of Israel, because the Labor Party is in the opposition and the Likud is in the government. But what I do want to say is that an American rabbi who would give that same speech from his pulpit or her pulpit would be risking their job. And my sense is that American Jews don't really get that Israeli society is no less divided than American society. And just as you can love America and hate the administration now, and that is true of people who hate the current administration, as well as people who hate the administration, which will be sworn in 18 days from now. Um, to love and support a country is not the same thing as supporting its government. And there are opinions which are widespread in Israeli society, which are considered almost taboo in the American Jewish community. One example is yellow ribbons and bring them home now, right? Which in America is seen as support for Israel. In Israel right now, bring them home now is an anti-government statement, right? Because most Israelis understand that the current government has no intention of reaching an agreement with Hamas. Okay, now you can say it's because anything that Hamas would agree to will be risky for Israel to agree to, and it's a legitimate perspective. But my friends in Israel, who are certainly not a representative cross-section of Israeli society, right? But my friends in Israel, almost to a person, believe that the current government is prolonging the war, which perforce means preventing the release of the hostages because they want to stay in power. Because Netanyahu, even though he's on trial, he's immune from being sent to jail should he be convicted, as long as he's the prime minister. And, for example, there's been repeated calls for an independent commission of inquiry into the failures of October 7th. And it's been rejected. And as a historical reference point, in September 1982, Israel was at war in Lebanon, and the Sabra and Shatila massacre took place. And almost immediately, Begin, who was the prime minister at the time, appointed a commission of inquiry, which ultimately led to the downfall of his own government. And here's the difference. I was, a young adult at the time that Begin was the prime minister. Much of the time that he was the prime minister, I was in Israel. I rarely agreed with Begin on policy, but if you asked me then, and if you ask me now, did Begin do what he did because he thought it was good for Israel? Absolutely. Does Netanyahu do what he does because he thinks it's good for Israel? Occasionally. But I think that, even though they come out of the same political and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to turn this into a sermon on what's going on in Israel, but the point is that there is a much wider divide in Israeli society than American Jews seem to believe, and therefore a much wider diversity of opinion in what is considered the mainstream. I'm not talking about the fringes of Israeli society, okay? And that's why I showed Rabbi Kariv's speech, because I mean, I think it's really important to me. I mean, I find it's hard to say it's inspiring, right? Because of what he had to say, but his passion was inspiring, and his articulateness is inspiring, and his refusal to, turn ownership of Judaism and the Jewish tradition over to the most fanatical parts of Israeli society is really, really important. And so that is a voice that, more American Jews should be familiar with. All right, let me stop now for a moment. If there are any thoughts, questions, comments that people would like to share, please. And if we're a small group, you can just jump in. You don't need to raise your hand. Mike.
Oh, okay. So I agree with you as to the image that Netanyahu had at the outset of this whole thing was it was a moment of opportunity for him to stay out of jail. I think that as life developed in the Middle East in the midst and because of this war, Netanyahu suddenly found himself sitting at a poker table with a remarkably good hand, and I have to say, I'd have to guess that his personal interests, at the very least, coincided with the national interest. He said, this is suddenly a moment when I can really clean house. And that's what he's been doing now, so that it's a different picture from October 8th, where he was just going after Hamas. Without question, Hamas was hiding behind the skirts of the Palestinians, and Hamas won either way. Either they won because they beat Israel, or they won because the world would be against Israel. But then comes Hezbollah, and then comes Syria, and suddenly Netanyahu, I think, has said the past week he's changing the face of the Middle East. And he is, and I think that's a good thing. I personally have never considered it any of my business what Israel does, because they're a sovereign state and I don't get a vote. Interested, but not of the belief that I have a say. Until suddenly Jews are starting to be hated wherever you go, then you got to say what's going on. And that's what's going on, is what Netanyahu is doing. In a way, that means Hamas wins regardless. But somehow you got to take into account that, we could live very well without that also. So it's a little bit tougher at the moment, but I believe that it's probably worth the candle if he gets away with it a little bit longer and he brings about a change in the Middle East that hopefully will be of somewhat long standing, I believe it will have been worth the pain and suffering that we have as well as the Israeli military.
Yeah, yeah. Sue, go ahead.
Well, I agree with what Mike said as far as, I'm interested in what happens in Israel. And of course, I always hope that, wise minds preside. But at the same time, my sons and daughters are not dying over there. And my life is not dictated by what goes on there, whether it means hiding in a shelter when a bomb comes or mourning relatives that die. So I feel in that respect, some American Jews have like kind of put their foot in it too much. I think it's okay for us to have an opinion and definitely, have Israel in our hearts and contribute to Israel and buy Israeli products and do whatever we can to support Israel. But I think we have to realize we're not suffering with them. And we may make a decision or think they should do something, and if that's not correct, then it's only something we believe. They're the ones that are going to shed the blood and not us.
I mean, the problem that I have with that, and certainly, Mike and Sue, you are both correct that, we have an opinion, we don't have a vote. Having said that, I mean, we do have a vote in the World Zionist Organization, which influences the spending priorities of Israel because of the literally billions of dollars that are at stake, which of quasi-governmental money. But the problem is that, look, I don't think that it is wise or even maybe ethical for American Jews to support policies that the overwhelming majority of Israelis oppose, or vice versa. But I don't think that there's anything wrong in saying, when you're talking about divided country, I cast my lot with this side rather than with this side. Again, you don't get a vote. You obviously don't get a vote, right? But Israel claims to speak for all Jews. It doesn't claim just to speak for its own citizens, right? And, when if you feel that Israel is embarking on a policy that is dangerous, is there not only a right, but maybe even a responsibility to speak out? Like, for example, and this is one of the things that sparked my interest in having this talk tonight, is that, all right, so Rabbi Kareev was talking about the Israeli hard rights, not only desire, but active planning. I mean, they have set up, he spoke about their, I listened to it in Hebrew, Hakaravani Habzuyim, the detestable caravans, right? A caravan, that means like like a prefab housing, right? They have set up prefab houses on the borders of Gaza, waiting to move them into Gaza the minute they get the green light, or maybe even without a green light. Let me just take a straw poll. Renewed Israeli settlement in Gaza. Anybody here think that's a good idea? Okay, nobody here thinks that's a good idea. So a few weeks ago, there was a statement by a number of American Jewish organizations saying we do not support the idea of renewed Israeli settlement in Gaza, and we urge the Israeli government not to do this. Okay, and why was it news? It was news because the signatories on this statement were not all the usual suspects like J Street and Americans for Peace Now and Trua, but also the Rabbinical Assembly and the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, as well as the equivalent organizations in the Reform movement. So now here's my question. We all just agreed that renewed Jewish settlement in Gaza would be a bad idea. Having said that, how do you feel about the conservative movement having signed on to a statement saying, this is a bad idea, Israel, please don't do this?
I'm going to make a couple of comments. I agree with you, Rabbi. I think that the reality is that what happens in Israel, which is its own separate state, which should allow us to say what we feel about Israel, like we say about every other state, affects us as Jews. It affects how people look at us as Jews. It affects how people look at us as Judaism. And we can see that in this country, both for good and for terrible. So to say that it's not our business and therefore, because we don't vote there, we don't have a role, is just simply, I think, not really realistic. Plus, the United States and American Jews contribute tremendous amounts of money and weapons to Israel. So it is in our interest to figure out what is the right thing to do. And I think that, the struggle with the American Jewish community has always been, how do you support Israel while addressing the challenges with differences with the Israeli government that are not productive in terms of the way it behaves? And how do we achieve what would be peace? Because yes, you can eliminate Hezbollah's leadership, you can eliminate Hamas and all of and bomb Gaza back to the Dark Ages, but that's not going to bring peace. It's not going to bring peace to the Middle East, and it's not going to bring peace to Israel. And so we do have a role, because it is us. I mean, this is the homeland of the Jewish people. This is a Jewish state, and we are Jews. And so we are deeply affected by it, for better or for worse.
Yeah, Toby, I think you wanted to say something.
I think Marcia said it perfectly, better than I could have.
All right. Anybody else? All right.
Well,
Yeah, Joe.
My first thought upon hearing that the conservative movement in Sinai was that they're mixing politics and religion. And that sometimes is a dangerous mix.
Look, I mean, what is mixing politics? What does mixing politics and religion mean, right? We have a prayer for the government, and we have a prayer for the state of Israel, right? We have an American flag on the bima. We have an Israeli flag on the bima. Okay, and there are certain things that if you ask me, all right.
But does the USCJ purport to speak for all conservative Jews? I guess is the point I'm trying to make.
Well, I mean, no more or less than any other membership organization, right? I mean, look, I mean, I get your point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I will very, very rarely sign on to a public statement. If they ask, like you see these statements and then it says organizations listed for information purposes only, right? If they're going to list me as Rabbi of Kehilat Shalom, even with that asterisk, I will not sign it, right? I am entitled to my own perspective as an individual, right? And in a setting like this one, I'm not shy about sharing it, but I would never claim to speak on behalf of, certainly not all Kehilat Shalom members, but forget all Kehilat Shalom members institutionally on behalf of Kehilat Shalom. Because I don't. I mean, if I want to speak institutionally on behalf of Kehilat Shalom, I would ask the board for authorization to do that, right? Which I have done. I can't think of more than one or two occasions in the last 13 years when I've, felt like doing that. Okay, so, I mean, so your point is well taken. I mean, it absolutely is. I mean, I think that this is kind of an example of like the camel's nose getting under the tent, right? Is that for a long time, it was absolutely taboo within the American Jewish community to criticize Israeli policy, right? The one exception was that the non-Orthodox movements would criticize Israeli policy vis-a-vis religion and state, right? The non-recognition of our converts, the violence inflicted regularly on women who want to pray at the Western Wall wearing talit and tefillin. And then a compromise was, well, you can't have women praying at the main plaza with talit and tefillin because that's offensive to the Orthodox. So we'll give you your own separate, but definitely not equal area where you can have non-mechitza services and bat mitzvahs and women can wear talis and tefillin and all of that. And then that agreement has never been implemented, right? And so we felt not only okay with criticizing that, but almost a moral imperative to criticize those things, right? And then if it's okay, right, because that does impact us, right? I mean, like, I mean, for many but not all purposes, the state of Israel does not consider my wife and my stepdaughter Jewish. Right? So it's not just a theoretical issue, right? And then, if we felt okay speaking out about that, then, the first time that sort of in mainstream organizations started speaking out about Israeli policy that was not like directly our narrow sectarian interest was the so-called judicial reform, right? But I mean, that was related to our narrow sectarian interests, because one of the things that the judicial reform aimed at doing was making it easier to nullify Supreme Court decisions, right? And the Supreme Court has quite consistently ruled in favor of women at the wall, ruled in favor of recognition of our conversions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that even though this was a broader political issue, it strongly affected our own narrow sectarian interests, right? And then, so yeah, I mean, the question is, to those of you who say, well, we don't vote and it doesn't affect us and blah, 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 right? Were we wrong to speak out for recognition of our own converts? Were we wrong to speak out for the right of women to daven with talis and tefillin at the wall? Were we wrong to do that? Anybody think we were? I mean, so where do you draw the line? I mean, where do you draw the line? Because these things do affect us, right? I mean, in the same way that American Christians are sometimes cautious. I mean, mainline American Christians, right? Like the mainline Protestant groups are not as pro-Israel as we would like them to be. And they will tell you because there are Christians throughout the Muslim world who could be endangered by us speaking out more forcefully, right? I mean, but that connection, I think, is much more remote than our connection. I mean, I assume, most of us have relatives in Israel, right? Or friends in Israel, or both, right? And so, look, I mean, I don't think that we should be, taking strong stands on Israeli tax policy, right? Or, stuff like that. But, and again, we don't have a vote, and rightly so, but it doesn't mean that things that happen in Israel don't affect us, right? And so, yeah, Marilyn.
I guess what worries me, what bothers me some, is that yes, you and I know we don't have a vote in Israel. We can't affect what's happening in Israel. But the general American citizens who are not Jewish look upon us as being able to influence and have a vote in Israel. And therefore we get affected, just whether it's from action or attitude, when you see all the pictures in the news and in the paper of dying children and crying women and all the issues going on with the populace in Gaza. And I guess I feel that and I don't know how to respond to people.
All right. I mean, I think that that is a important question, and my perspective, and I could be wrong, okay, but I've been, doing this now a long time, and for some part of my career, I mean, my main job was talking to non-Jews about Jews and Judaism, right? Is to I mean, look, most Americans look at what Russia is doing in Ukraine and they say, how horrible, how terrible, right? Certainly we do. They don't then go on to say, therefore, Russia should not exist, right? They look at what China does to the Uyghurs and to the Tibetans, and they say, and in Hong Kong, and they say, how awful, how terrible. They don't then say, therefore, China should not exist, right? Israel is the only country of which I'm aware that people say what Israel is doing is horrible and terrible, therefore, Israel should not exist, right? I don't think the answer is to therefore feel obligated to defend everything that Israel does. I don't think that that's helpful. I think it's actually deeply unhelpful, right? I think rather to say things along the line of what I just said, right? Yeah, some of the things that Israel does are wrong. Many, if not most, Israelis think that they're wrong. That doesn't mean Israel should therefore not exist, right? And I think then the question has to be asked of people who do go that next step, right? So what is supposed to happen to the 8 or 9 million Israelis who live there now? What's your answer, right? And this is where, ironically, there is this theory that spectrums are not really horseshoes, they're more like circles, political spectrums, right? And the anti-Israel left and the Israeli far right both agree that there should not be a two-state solution, there should be a one-state solution, right? The difference is that the Israeli right says one state, but only Jews and a handful of Arabs can vote, right? I mean, and some of those on the left say one state, but probably Jews couldn't vote, right? because frankly, I mean, if you had and this is, look, I mean, and I don't know whatever happened to it. I spent 25 minutes on the phone a few weeks ago with a reporter for the Baltimore Sun about that dinner, that Saudi Arabian sponsored dinner that I attended a few weeks ago, right? Where this Saudi Arabian speaker quite forthrightly said the only solution is a two-state solution, okay, which I entirely agree with. But I then said the two-state solution is both absolutely necessary and absolutely impossible. Because, Israel has allowed the creation of a situation with the settlements that, 20, 30 years ago, you could have said, well, we'll just redraw the lines, right? And which was actually what Clinton and Ehud Barak agreed to. At Camp David, and then at Sharm el-Sheikh, and it was Arafat who said no, right? The proposal was, because look, nobody thinks that these massive, they're called settlements, they're actually cities, right? No, you're not going to dismantle Gush Etzion or Ariel or places like that. But these sit almost on the green line, right? So the proposal was Israel will annex the settlement blocks and give the Palestinians an equivalent amount of land, basically in the Negev adjacent to the Gaza Strip, right? So that the Palestinians aren't losing land, it's just a swap, okay? And when Clinton was in office, that could have been conceivable. It's not conceivable anymore because there are, if you look at a map of the settlements today, they're too intertwined, right? So, it was traumatic when Israel withdrew a handful of settlers from northern Sinai, and it was traumatic when Israel withdrew a handful of settlers from northern Gaza. Anybody seriously contemplate the idea that they're going to withdraw 1 million settlers from the West Bank? It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen, right? So, that's where you get, so really, and look, what then is the solution, right? If you believe in democracy, right? And a two-state solution is impossible, then answer is a one-state solution and everybody has a vote, right? In which case you've created a situation where roughly 50% of the people in that one state who vote are Jewish, and roughly 50% are Palestinian Arabs, and they can democratically repeal the law of return, right? Democratically repeal the requirement that public institutions and the army have kosher kitchens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. democratically eliminate Hatikva as the national anthem, democratically take the Star of David off the Israeli flag, right? And so then you say, well, that's untenable, so we can't allow them a vote, right? And then when people say it's apartheid, what's your answer? Right, Mike?
Yeah, I was taken aback when you snuck in there the whole thing suddenly is dependent or influenced by and influences who has the right to vote. I never saw it quite that way. I think that you've got, for whatever reason, the history gave us this swatch of land that is inside Israel, but not inside Israel, and that has people who felt aggrieved from the get-go. And you have a remarkable difference in wealth and the level of development and quality of life and whatever, even before Hamas ensured that the Palestinians were going to pay the price. I was on the beach and a conservative Israeli said to me, we have to change the topic of conversation. We have to offer the Palestinians enough monetarily if they move out and go to neighboring areas and have suddenly the wealth to establish themselves in a good way. And I said, yeah, we call that ethnic cleansing. And she didn't buy that, of course. So the next day I saw her there and I told her that in the interim, I called 87 Palestinians and nobody liked your idea. But the fact is, it's not, I don't think it's the vote. I think it's the domination and the way people are treated and whatnot. And I don't think you have to cleanse. I think you could encourage. And I mean, it's a question, those kind of policies that Israel would follow that would make a Palestinian happy. You can't believe that the only thing that would make a Palestinian happy is if Israel goes away. I don't believe that the American Jewish groups would advocate for the destruction of Israel or the disappearance of Israel. Their objection is to what Netanyahu is doing, and
Right.
therefore what Israel now represents. But those are really different things. I mean, there are places in the middle or someplace short of ethnic cleansing, but where but short of a two-state solution, that where this, I believe, a solution could be found as a way of existence. The trouble is nobody asks me, but I mean, I just think that there's incentives that could be provided right there. You don't have to tell them to move. You could do it for them right there, where suddenly life is good. And with all due respect, I don't believe that the Israelis have gone out of their way to make that. But it, like I said, I don't get a vote. They get to decide. My Israeli friend said, not to worry, we're going to settle the whole place and that'll be the end of the discussion. This was several years ago. And I said, you may believe that for the moment. And in the meanwhile, your enemies are going to get weaponry that is better than those stupid, what are they called, Kurtz missiles or something, where half the time they blow up Palestinians and whatnot. Eventually, they will have better weaponry. This is a timeline of opportunity. Solve the problem. And settlements don't do it, but somebody's got to figure out what does it. And I don't believe the vote is the crucial thing.
No, the vote is not the crucial. That's not the point. The point is that, all right, this is my perspective, right? Is that look, in 1967, there was a war. Right now, I was 7 years old. Okay, so I don't remember much from that period, right? But an argument can be made. I mean, and I think can be made quite well, that even though Israel like fired the first shot, there were legal casus belli, I mean, the blockade and so on and so forth, right? That it was a defensive war. Israel found itself in possession of this wide swath of territory. And if you look at just land area, not population, but just land area, most of that was subsequently returned, right? Because the Sinai was far and away the majority of the land that was captured, but it was like relatively unpopulated, right? And right, but international law does not allow you to conquer and maintain permanently areas by force, right? I mean, belligerent occupation is supposed to be a temporary situation pending a resolution of the conflict.
Glad nobody
Right.
told that to the British.
Well, but how much, I mean, what do the British control now today?
That's not the point. The point is that we fought them and we have a Declaration of Independence. And if you conquer a
Right.
place, on the contrary, I think history says you bought it.
Yeah,
I
but
don't believe
that's not the way the world is supposed to operate post UN Charter. Right? It's just not. Mike, you were in the State Department. You know this better than I.
I can't quote the chapter and verse that shows you are right or wrong. I'm not that familiar with it. I just see what goes on.
But it's one thing to hold on to these territories temporarily until there is some sort of agreement, right? Either as bargaining chips or because there's no other better solution. But you can't, I mean, it's 58 years, right? I mean, people who weren't born yet when Israel, I mean, Palestinians who weren't born yet when Israel occupied this territory, now have gray hair, right? And grandchildren, and sometimes great grandchildren, right? It's not a temporary situation anymore. It's not, and therefore, it's really hard to justify that, like, to ourselves, let alone convince the rest of the world, right? And so the result has been, and that is why, I mean, young American Jews are perceiving that the American Jewish community has said, you can be liberal and progressive, or you can be a loyal Jew. But you can't be both. And if that is our message, then it should come as no surprise that we're losing the young generation, right? That can't possibly be the message, right? Support human rights, support self-determination for everybody but Palestinians. right? It also can't be support human rights, support self-determination for everybody but Jews, right? I mean, and that's the problem, right? And therefore you have kids on college campuses who support J Street U and things like that, who feel that like there's no place for them, right? Because they go to Hillel and they're told support everything Israel does or you're a disloyal Jew. And then they go to the progressives and they say oppose everything that Israel does or you're not a true progressive, right? And is it possible to be pro-Israel, pro-peace, pro-human rights, and progressive? I mean, I would like to think so, because that's how I define myself. Right? But it's a problem. And I mean, my solution is to say the right of Israel to exist in peace and security is not negotiable.
Correct.
But the right of Palestinians to self-determination should also be not negotiable. And the task, and to me, the bottom line, right? And one state, two state, where it doesn't matter. I mean, to me, and I see you, Sue, and I will get to you after this sentence, okay? You have one country that is the homeland of two nations. The Jews are not going anywhere, and the Palestinians are not going anywhere. Right? So the task is to figure out a way, given that neither nation is going anywhere, for them to live together. Okay? And I am in favor of any solution that will allow that to happen. One state, two states, three states, four states, right? One fish, two fish, green fish, blue fish. Whatever solution that will allow the Israeli Jews and the Palestinian Arabs to both stay and live together, I'm in favor of. Bottom line. Sue.
Just a couple of quick things. First of all, I didn't mean to say that American Jews shouldn't have a voice and shouldn't have an opinion, just like we have an opinion of incoming and outgoing administrations.
Right.
And certainly we do, because we're Jewish, people come to us and look and ask our opinion. So I just meant if you get to the point where you're pushing your agenda more than just voicing what you think,
Right.
then I think you have to stop and think, like, if I think this is a great solution and my group is going to support it, and all of a sudden this solution doesn't work out well and Israeli boys and girls are dying, then I have to accept part of that responsibility if I live in this country and I'm pushing what I think is right, forcefully rather than just voicing an opinion. That's my concern. I have no problem with, people saying their opinion or, supporting a group that feels the way they do. But I think we have to look at a point at which we're going to push something that we need to find out how Israelis feel about it before we do that. My other two thoughts quickly, I wondered what the current Palestinian thoughts are on a two-state solution that either does or doesn't involve Jerusalem. And I think that's a consideration, because I've heard a lot of Palestinians that'll say, we're not going to have a two-state solution with what we've had. We need to have part of Jerusalem. So, that's a consideration as well. And the other thing was that I was watching a Reformed movement discussion on education in the Reform movement. And they were very critical on how the curriculum is designed. And they said that the current generation of Reformed young people that have come out of the Reformed schools, that it's taught in such a way that Israel is separated from Judaism and ethics, so that these educators were saying that the curriculum needs an overhaul. And I don't know about the conservative, curriculum. I was just listening to this program.
Right.
But it was interesting because I never would have thought that the way kids study in the curriculum could cause, could change the way they're thinking. And they were saying that it's very easy for young Jewish adults that have gone through the Reform movement curriculum to feel like they can be a good Jew and a good person and forget about Israel because you don't need it anymore. And he said that they need to intertwine the curriculums, and that's what's been missing through quite a number of years. So I just thought that was fascinating, to hear these curriculum specialists, discuss that sort of thing.
Right. I mean, I'm not sure exactly, who or what you were watching, obviously, but, there was a big conference recently sponsored by Stephen Wise Free Synagogue, talking about a lot of this stuff. And, Rabbi Ami Hirsch, who's the senior rabbi there, has been a very strong critic from within of the Reform movement, saying that, our kids are not being taught to support Israel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, I don't know if he's right or wrong because it's not my problem, right? But, I'll send you, it may take me a couple days because I probably won't be able to do it tomorrow because I have to go to Largo for a doctor's appointment. But there was an article in the Forward not so long ago, like in spring of 2024, about limits of debate within the Reform and conservative rabbinical schools, right? In other words, should anti-Zionists be allowed to study for the Reform and conservative rabbinate, right? And I mean, to me, I guess my answer to that would depend on how one defines anti-Zionist, right? In other words, look, I consider myself a very strong Zionist. There are many people to my right who would say, no, you're not, you're an anti-Zionist, right? So, anything that any sort of like limit on freedom of speech or freedom of belief or whatever that's going to leave me on the other side, I'm not in favor of, right? But I do think, again, to me, again, as I said, and this is it, right? There are two nations who share one country, and neither one is going anywhere. So any solution that allows them to live together in some modicum of peace, I'm in favor of. certainly if you say no, the 8 million Israeli Jews need to pack up and go somewhere else, I don't think you have any place in the rabbinate at all. But I'm also not exactly in favor of witch hunts, right? I mean, we have a bad experience with witch hunts. So some of this, I mean, as much as it pains me to say this, some of this stuff I have a lot of questions and very few answers. Anyway, Laila Tov, good night. Thank you very much. Shabbat Shalom. Right.